The Intel i5-4590 launched all the way back in May of 2014 at a price of just shy of $200, $192 to be exact. Basically, if you pick this thing up at or near the time it originally launched for the purpose of gaming, you've gotten your money's worth. It was a solid purchase at the time, and in the majority of titles, even out today, it's still a viable option. Now, today we're going to be pairing up the 4590 with a graphics card you shouldn't actually purchase right now, which is, of course, the GTX 1650, a card that launched just back in 2019. The value there has been a little bit sus. See that? See what I did there? We're reaching that younger demographic here on YouTube, that Gen Z demographic. And to be honest, the value still isn't there for this card, especially right now, in a time that the thing regularly sells on the secondhand market such as eBay for about $200. Today we're going to be putting this odd pairing together to see if you can still pull off respectable frame rates in esports games that run well on toaster ovens from the 90s, and as well as on modern AAA titles that really don't run well on, like, anything. Well, looking at you, Cyberpunk. Before we get started here, it's already looking like 2021 may be a tough year for building gaming PCs, so let me know in those comments down below some used parts or even full configurations you might be interested in testing out. I'm always looking for deals both locally and on eBay, and knowing what the audience is interested in may help me find interesting deals to check out. Also, if you hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, all those things are helpful as well, because I'm totally not above shameless self-promotion, so there you go. Now, as we begin, it's worth describing exactly why you may find yourself actually running an i5-4590 paired with a GTX 1650. I mean, one of those parts wasn't a bad value when it first launched, and the other one of those parts was the GTX 1650. Keep in mind that until recently, the GTX 1650 was coming down in price and was for a brief time very reasonable considering its acceptable performance in many modern titles and its low overall power consumption. This EVGA model I'm working with was picked up on one of EVGA's B-stock midweek madness sales for something like $120, which means by the time you add in shipping and taxes added onto it, it was likely around that $130 mark. Now, even at that price, it wasn't a spectacular deal due to the volume of cheap RX 580s that were on the market, but it was at least competitive. In short, the 1650 was a reasonable upgrade to an older GPU like a 660 or a GTX 760 in the not too distant past. Just because it's a bad value right now doesn't make it forever a bad deal. Now, in addition to the i5-4590 and the GTX 1650, we're working with 16 gigabytes of DDR3 memory running at 1600 megahertz in a dual channel configuration, and all games are being run on a SATA-based SSD, as is completely normal for my test bench. In a recent video, and I'll try to remember to link that card above me somewhere, I did take a look at the 1650 with a modern CPU, in this case the Ryzen 5600X. That pairing was a little bit like running an F1 engine on an RC car, but the car did run Cyberpunk 2077 just fine. So what we're looking at today is whether or not the i5-4590 is still able to pull off reasonable frame rates paired with a reasonably budget-oriented GPU in 2021. With all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the pairing in some popular modern titles to lead off the year. As usual, we're starting off our gaming benchmarks with Fortnite on the low graphics preset at 1080p. Also, as usual, this game continues to run like a dragster. It gives us incredible performance until it just kind of stops. Then it picks right back up again with high frame rates. In more exact terms, this title gave us 155 frames per second on average, only 55 FPS for our 1% low, and a dumpster fire worthy 21 FPS for our 0.1% lows. As you hopefully can notice in the actual footage here, the game gives us periodic hitches and stutters that definitely take away from the experience. In this instance, it's our CPU holding us back, as it's pretty much pinned in this title. Giving this 4590 a break by capping the frame rate would be the easiest way to free up CPU resources just a little bit in hopes of avoiding some of the stuttering issues. Alternatively, raising the graphics settings can also shift some of the load to the GPU. Regardless, this title is absolutely playable on this hardware configuration, but you'll want to do some fine tuning in the settings before you truly hop into Fortnite. Overwatch is a different story. Like Fortnite, we get excellent average frame rates, this time on the medium graphics preset. On average, we're seeing 134 FPS with the 1% and 0.1% lows at 93 and 73 respectively. While the CPU still seems to be the limiting factor for the most part in Overwatch, it's not pinned to 100% the entire time, which is likely one of the factors leading to virtually no stutters in this title whatsoever. In Overwatch, we have a PB&J type of a pairing here with the 1650 and the 4590. Gameplay is perfect, and it's easy to see why you can get lost in a game like Overwatch when it runs as well on this hardware configuration as it does. Call of Duty Warzone on low settings at 1080p gives us 55 average frames per second, 37 on the 1% lows, and 30 on the 0.1% lows. And this is really a title that actually feels better in game than the numbers sound. If you demand at least 60 FPS in a title like Warzone, you do have some room to drop the resolution down a little bit to hit that magic 60 FPS, but the gameplay is smooth enough for casual players, largely because even though the numbers aren't high, they are very consistent and we don't see big spikes in frame times. The Red Dead Redemption 2 benchmark on low settings at 1080p falls into the same bucket as Warzone when it comes to playability. With an average frame rate of 50 FPS, it's not going to surpass the capability of your monitor's refresh rate, but at the same time, the 1% and 0.1% lows stay above 30 FPS, at least in the built-in benchmark. As a result, the game looks perfectly smooth, and the fact that this game isn't overly fast-paced will help it feel acceptable, once again, to most players. Finally, we come to Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p on the low graphics preset, and it's a mixed bag of cinematic happiness and garbage all at once. In scenes where the i5-4590 is able to keep up with the GTX 1650, you should be able to fully enjoy Night City, at least here in the low graphics preset. There will be scenes, however, where the i5 gets bogged down, and that's where you see frame rates drop as far as the mid-20s, making those scenes mostly unplayable. Luckily, it appears that those vacations to the lower frame rates seem to be mostly short trips, but those scenes are borderline unplayable until the frame rate recovers, even for an often meandering title like Cyberpunk. While I do consider Cyberpunk playable at 1080p with this hardware configuration, it only barely clears the bar, and if you plan to play the game using these settings with these pairings, expect to have to occasionally reload a scene because you couldn't aim during the slideshow and the protagonist paid the price. As it stands right now, at the beginning of 2021, all indicators seem to point to a scarce PC components market throughout the early part of this year. With that being the case, there's certainly a market for pairing some of these modern, lower-end GPUs, even if they're being priced like mid-range cards right now, with CPUs from generations past. There's a lot of affordable used CPUs on the market right now that can still hold up in gaming, even in modern titles. And for that matter, if you're going the route of finding an Intel-based platform for gaming, one of the older generation systems, I strongly recommend looking for motherboard combos. Often you'll find a motherboard with RAM and CPU at pretty steep discounts compared to finding each part individually. That's likely your best bet for actually putting together a somewhat budget gaming PC right now for the time being. This should free up some of your money to actually build a system with a GPU and not using integrated graphics, and specifically finding a GPU that's actually decent and not just potato quality like a GT 1030 or something ridiculous like that. They are also, by the way, overpriced. Now, to the end of looking for good component combos, at this point you should really be looking at Intel older i7s. These i5s still do have some life left in them, but you often don't have to shell out much more cash for those i7s instead of getting an i5 combo, and some titles will see big gains by moving from 4 cores and 4 threads to 4 cores and 8 threads. Fortnite and Cyberpunk in my testing are great examples of titles that could really use just a little bit more help from the CPU. And finally, and I can't say this enough, use your local market to your advantage. I'm talking about Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, Gumtree, OfferUp, or whatever other apps are unique to your region. eBay is great for getting rough estimates about how much you can expect to spend on a system, but the best deals almost always are found on one-off deals locally. So those are my thoughts on this hardware pairing, but as always, I do want to hear from you. Let me know in those comments down below. what you think about the idea of putting an older gen i5 together with a newer budget card like the 1650, again, even though it's a little bit more expensive than it really should be right now, especially if you're someone that's pairing some similar CPU with some similar GPU. So, you know, if you have an i5-4590 and a GTX 1650, let us know in those comments exactly how well that pairing is doing for you. And of course, if you like this video, give it a like, share, subscribe, and comment. All those things are very helpful for the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.